Good morning, everyone. I'm Fred Kemp, President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. Senator Whitehouse, welcome. It's great to have you here, as always. It's an honor for you to join us with this, for this crucial discussion, particularly due to your personal commitment to the issue. I'd like to note that we're live streaming this event, and luckily a member of the audience just moved from his place in front of the camera, so now we really are live streaming the event. So welcome to all those watching online. For those of you active on Twitter, please join the conversation using hashtag #ACWater, hashtag #ACWater. Today we're marking the official release of the report, Ecology Meets Geopolitics, Water Security in Himalayan Asia. It's the culmination of nearly 2 years of intensive exploration on-the-ground research conducted in the Himalayas. It's weighty, it's incredibly attractive, terrific graphics, terrific arguments. I really commend you to read it and pass it on to others. It's on our website, and I think we have some copies here as well. First and foremost, I'd like to thank the Smith Richardson Foundation for their generous support and the original scholarship it produced. There aren't enough foundations out there that really want to support this kind of rich scholarship and research over time. And Smith Richardson really sets itself apart by encouraging this kind of work that is so lasting and deep that it can make a real difference in how people think about subjects. And although she could not be here today, I'd also like to thank Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, an Atlantic Council Board Director, for her strategic guidance of this project. Thanks as well are in order for the U.S. Water Partnership, which is co-hosting this morning's event with us, and thanks to them as well for contributing insight and expertise, rich insight and expertise to this effort. This important work is spearheaded by the Council's Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, which develops sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and the world. Led by Barry Pavel, the center also seeks to honor General Brent Scowcroft's legacy of service and embodies his ethos of nonpartisan commitment to the cause of security and support for U.S. leadership in cooperation with friends and allies and partners. That's really the underlying ethos of the Atlantic Council, which is working with allies to secure the future. And I think that was underscored in spades yesterday with our NATO Engages conference, where we worked with a rich consortium of partners. And I hope some of you saw the NATO Secretary General give the first address to joint session of Congress of any leader of a multilateral organization. It was really rich. Peter Engelke, a prolific writer and senior fellow of the Scowcroft Center, co-authored this report with David Mikkel, a senior manager at the Stockholm International Water Institute, both of whom will join later this morning for a panel discussion. Many thanks as well to all the speakers joining us this morning, including Sherry Goodman, a member of the executive committee of our board and former Undersecretary of Defense. Flip Wester, and by the way, I've been wanting to say this line at the Atlantic Council for a long period of time, so I'm pleased to say that he will be beaming in from Kathmandu. So Flip Wester beaming in from Kathmandu. Andrew, had wanted to say it twice. Andrew Friedman of Axios, who will moderate the discussion, specializing in Axios on a range of science issues, and particularly focusing on climate. Mary Melnick from USAID, and Carrie Lee, philanthropist and senior advisor at the Scowcroft Center, who's just done remarkable work for us. This report comes at a critical moment. Swiftly rising global demand for water, increasingly tight supplies of it, and the stresses presented by a rapidly changing planet are combining to push societies into new and uncomfortable territory. The risk that water insecurity will lead to violent conflict within societies or across international boundaries is not only rising, it's already happening. The nightmare scenario, indeed the one we all fear, is that such conflict could involve, in one way or another, the world's major powers. It's for that reason that we embarked on an intensive exploration of the water security challenges in Asia. There are few regions in the world where water insecurity has as much consequence as it does in Himalayan Asia, a term delineating the vast swath of the continent dominated by Asia's high mountain ranges and the rivers that flow from them. Those mountains, including the Himalayas themselves, produce much of the fresh water that nourishes billions of people across East, Southeast, South, and Central Asia. Rapid population and economic growth in these regions are placing enormous stresses on fresh water sources, and meanwhile, geopolitical competition, including among distrusting nuclear-armed rivals, provides an unsettling backdrop to these challenges. And there are viable pathways for avoiding such an outcome, the most important of which treat water as a shared resource to be managed cooperatively among a variety of actors, public and private, national and subnational. Without such leadership and engagement, there is a significant risk of water insecurity becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy wherein states securitize water and therefore define it in zero-sum geopolitical terms. And that scenario has few, if any, positive outcomes. I can't think of a more informed and dedicated leader to join us today to provide some remarks on these important issues than Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. Senator Whitehouse was nominated by President Bill Clinton to be Rhode Island's United States Attorney in 1994 and was elected Attorney General of Rhode Island in 1998, a position in which he served until 2003. In November 2006, Senator Whitehouse was elected to the U.S. Senate, where he is a member of the Budget Committee, the Environment and Public Works Committee, Judiciary Committee, and the Finance Committee. He's also co-founder of the Senate Climate Action Task Force and helped form the bipartisan Senate Oceans Caucus. Senator Whitehouse also serves as the honorary co-chair of the Atlantic Council's Task Force on U.S. Nuclear Energy and National Security alongside Senator Mike Crapo. We look forward to launching the task force report entitled U.S. Nuclear Energy Leadership, Innovation, and the Strategic Global Challenge next month. We're extremely grateful for Senator Whitehouse's leadership on the issue we'll talk about today and on nuclear energy and its importance to nuclear security. Before I turn over to the Senator, I'd like to remind everyone that this event is on the record, and do pick up your copy of the report. It is in the lobby if you haven't picked it up already. One last thing, I do also want to salute, aside from Barry, who leads the Scowcroft Center, Sam Klein, who's done such great work on this and so many other projects. So with that, thank you for your attention, and Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fred. It is terrific to be with all of you today at this very important gathering. I am exceedingly conscious of how terrific the panel is that is going to follow me, so I will try not to overstay my welcome at the podium, but I do want to express my gratitude to the Atlantic Council and to the Scowcroft Center for inviting me here today as you unveil this really terrific report. Himalayan Asia faces major water security challenges, so this work is particularly timely and significant. In the region, relations between Pakistan and India have long been fraught. In human history, violent conflicts over water are as old as memory. Kashmir is a crucible of contest for riparian control of great rivers, and climate change is destabilizing water flows. This combination creates a region ripe for conflict, even devastation. A piece of this story is found at Ohio State in a nondescript industrial-looking building that you reach up chipped concrete steps. Inside, a plain linoleum corridor leads to a meat locker-type door, behind which is one of the most extraordinary libraries on the planet. This library stores ice cores, drilled out of glaciers around the world and carefully preserved and brought back to Ohio State frozen by Professor Ellen Mosley Thompson and her husband, Professor Lonnie Thompson. Ellen and Lonnie run Ohio State's Bird, Polar, and Climate Research Center, and they've spent their lives studying the world's glaciers, including over 34 years researching in the Himalayan region. State-of-the-art instruments allow scientists to read the ice cores. By evaluating ratios of oxygen and hydrogen isotopes, they can build a record of atmospheric temperature going far before humankind into Earth's history. Molecules and dust particles measured with chromatographs and particle counters tell stories of prehistoric droughts and leave a record of farming and industrial practices over the centuries. The ice cores tell us how carbon emissions are rapidly altering the Himalayan climate. And 30 years of satellite data tells the tale of glacier retreat on the Tibetan Plateau, the most intense in the Himalayas. If we manage to keep global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade, Lonnie and Ellen warn that temperatures across most of the Himalayas would still rise 2.1 degrees centigrade on average. This optimistic result would cut Himalayan glacier mass more than a third by 2100. If we fail to act, business as usual means loss of nearly 70% of glacier mass. This has enormous geopolitical implications. The U.S. Institute of Peace reports 3 hazards. First, that poor responses to climatic shifts create shortages of resources such as land and water. Second, that those shortages are followed by negative secondary impacts such as more sickness, hunger, and joblessness. Finally, that poor responses to these, in turn, open the door to conflict. I would add a 4th hazard to the list. In the international competition of ideologies and ideas, there will be reputational harm to America, to capitalism, and to democracy for failing to act timely to address the carbon emissions problem. The story why we failed is not a flattering one and will add to the reputational harm. The vanishing glaciers of the Himalayas are essential to Asia's water supply. Yearly snow and glacier melt feeds rivers throughout Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Over 1 billion people rely on this water source. Just one river, the Indus, provides 40% of the dry season water for China, Pakistan, and India. Glacial meltwater from India feeds all of Pakistan's major rivers. More melting means, at first, more river flow. And climate change can also intensify heavy rains, combining in devastating floods. In 2010, floodwaters surged through Pakistan's Indus Valley, killing more than 1,700 people, causing food shortages for 4 million, and resulting in an estimated $43 billion in property damage. Disasters like this strain the capacity of government and allow extremists to stoke resentment and conflict. At the same time, because the glaciers are melting, they are also shrinking. And at some point, the swell of added meltwater is offset by the loss of glacier, and the system veers from flood to drought. As glaciers in the western Himalayas continue to disappear, the runoff that supplies Pakistan's rivers could drop by 40 to 50%. India is planning to build dams on the Chenab River in volatile Kashmir, through which the river flows downstream to Pakistan. Pakistan fears India pinching the Chenab's flow to put pressure on Islamabad, especially in times of heightened conflict. Suspicions of riparian mischief run high, and partition-era memories linger. Food security, power generation, and public safety are all at stake, giving nuclear-armed adversaries a lot to fight over. It is imperative that we work towards a climate change solution and that America lead. A report by the National Intelligence Council prepared in January 2017 informed our new president that, and I quote, issues like climate change invoke high stakes and will require sustained collaboration. Himalayan glaciers present just such high stakes. The report that you are unveiling today counsels the United States should support the protection of Himalayan Asia's water tower, the Hindu Kush Himalayan ranges, their ecosystems, and the rivers spawned by them. The water tower is the single indispensable feature of Asian geography, one that serves the collective interests of billions of people, end quote. That water tower is a predictable casualty of climate change with predictably dangerous effects. A 2017 Hudson Institute report advises Washington can help alleviate, even if indirectly, the effects of natural catastrophes and climate change in the region. By doing so, it would forestall economic crises and destabilization that could result from increases in the number and severity of extreme weather events. I traveled to Pakistan after the floods, and I was struck by how keen the gratitude was for American help. Someone rescued by an American helicopter, or treated by an American doctor, or fed by American MREs when hungry, does not soon forget it. Daniel Webster described the work of our founders as having set the world an example. This has been an enduring vision of America. From Jonathan Winthrop to Ronald Reagan, we have called ourselves a city on a hill, set high for the world to witness. From President Kennedy to President Obama, inaugural addresses have noted that the glow of our ideals lights the world. President Clinton observed that people the world over have always been more impressed by the power of our example than any example of our power. American leadership can and must help address the challenges facing the Himalayan region and the rest of the world. We must do so in a way that is consistent with those principles. Time is short, and we are not on that course right now. So thank you to the authors of this report and to the Atlantic Council and Scowcroft Center for fostering it and for fostering what I hope will be a course correction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Those were powerful words, powerful statement that will be up on our website, both in terms of the streaming and also the text. It's an honor to host you as always, and we hope you'll join us again soon. We'll see you for the nuclear report. And at this point, I'll welcome the panel to the stage, if you can take the stage. Thank you.
I was kind of hoping that I would be hidden behind the podium the whole time. So hi, I'm Andrew Friedman. I'm the science editor at Axios. You may know us for being in your inbox like 18 times a day. I just want to briefly introduce the panel. Just on my left is Sherry Goodman, board director at the Atlantic Council, member of the National Executive Committee at the U.S. Water Partnership, and former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, and a widely noted expert on national security, the intersection between national security and climate change. We also have Mary Melnick in the Asia Bureau at USAID as a senior program manager there. And Peter Engelke, who obviously is the driving force behind the report that is bringing us here today, the Senior Fellow for Foresight, Strategy, and Risks Initiative at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security here at the Atlantic Council. And via video teleconference, we have David Mickle, Senior Manager of Transboundary Water Management Department at the Stockholm International Water Institute, as well as Philip Wester, Regional Program Manager, Mountain Knowledge and Action Networks, which is a cool title, at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, and he's joining us from Kathmandu. So to kick things off, and some of these are generated by my reading of the report and just my knowledge of this subject area in general. And after a few questions, I really would hope that the panel would engage with each other. Feel free to object to what your other panelists say and interrupt. I just want it to be a lively discussion. But the first question, and we can kind of go down the row and then go to the folks that are beaming in, is how you see both water dynamics and political dynamics changing, even just during the past few years, within Himalayan Asia. And we can start with whoever wants to start.
Sure. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you all for being here today. Very quickly before I get into answering your question, this document that you have in front of you was, in fact, the result of nearly 2 years of work. I thank my co-author David, who's with us today, for doing it with me, as well as to Barry and Matt, my bosses in the Scowcroft Center, to Fred, and of course to the Senator for being with us today. So Ecology Meets Geopolitics is our answer to this question, right? I mean, that's hence the title of the document. We decided to look at this region of the world because embedded in your question is the answer, right? Which is that both sides of that equation are dynamic right now. The Senator, I think, laid out in really spectacular fashion and very, very eloquently his answer to the question of why the Himalayas. To clarify, the report focuses on not just the Himalayas, but the Hindu Kush Himalayas and a series of other mountain ranges on the Tibetan Plateau, basically the high mountains of Central Asia, which feed the rivers, almost all of the major rivers that run across Asia, with the exception of the western part of Asia. Hence, our report covers South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and East Asia. But as the Senator laid out, that whole ecological equation is changing, and changing very rapidly, due primarily to the climate-induced forces, and it results in all kinds of consequences, ranging from flooding on the one hand to drought on the other, to increased temperatures at high elevations, to increased temperatures at low elevation, and you have basically greater variability in ecosystems, right? And that's, generally speaking, not a good thing. Right? Human systems interact with ecological systems and are dependent upon those ecological systems. The more variability you have in those ecological systems, the more insecurity you're going to have as a generalized proposition for human systems, in particular for human systems that are heavily dependent upon natural resources, specific natural resources, and those human systems are in places that are poor. So that's sort of the ecological side. At the very same time that you have this change in sort of the indispensable feature of Asian geography, you've got geopolitical dynamism, right? Which also isn't the happiest storyline most of the time when that occurs. You do have, as a matter of fact, this rise of two great Asian powers, the largest in terms of population, the largest in terms of economy. Both of which, of course, have nuclear weapons, both of which historically have had some issues with one another. On top of that, you've got a whole series of, generally speaking, distrustful relationships among and between the countries of all of those regions. So you have these two things clashing at one and the same time is our answer, and the reason why we wanted to write this report in the first place. And so our answer is, and I think the Senator did a good job of actually articulating why this matters so much, is that unless we come to grips with the former, the latter is going to become, it's going to feed into the dynamics of the latter, and not necessarily in a happy way.
Great. Did you want to tackle that question?
Yes, I'll just speak a little bit about what I've seen over the years since we began working on this issue in 2009. And when we came into it, there was basically a lack of information and knowledge, and the odd blog post here. But we fast forward to today, and Senator Whitehouse provided an excellent description and summary of the problem. So we have more and more people who are able to speak to it and understand it. At the same time, the research has increased. I think perhaps 10 years ago or more, there were very few data sets on glaciers. So now our knowledge of the change of what is happening, what's happening to the mass balance, changes in snow cover days, the amount of runoff from these high mountain areas contributing to water supply in the region. These are things we're beginning to understand more and more, which are fundamental in understanding where the critical hot points are. There's a reference in the report, in order to analyze and prepare or mitigate and prevent conflict, we need to know where the hot spots are. And similarly, when we began the work, there was always, governments won't share data. And granted, between India and Pakistan, there's still official problems. But what we at USAID and the increased knowledge and organizations like ICIMOD are bringing researchers and scientists together, and there is data sharing. These are transboundary basins. And we have begun just the tip of the iceberg of now trying to match, and I'm sure perhaps others have as well, bringing these researchers and government decision makers together to begin to promote collaboration. And at the local level, there is cross-border collaboration in some areas as well in Central Asia. So I think we're beginning to see some changes in cooperation and collaboration and recognition of the problem. And among people in government, some are becoming very fluent and elegant in understanding the problem. And even people, for example, there was a Tajik government official who is responsible for Rogan Dam saying, my goodness, I didn't know this data existed and it's so very important to us. So there is hope. There's grave concern, and yet there is still some hope. Things are changing.
Sherry?
Okay, great. It's terrific to be here, and I want to thank the Atlantic Council. I particularly want to thank Peter and David. I know you've labored very hard on this project, and it's really terrific. And Barry and Matt, with your leadership in the Scowcroft Center. This is an important piece of the Foresight initiative, and also deeply connects the ecological, natural resource, and climate security issues into the mainstream geopolitical analysis, which I think is quite fundamental. So thank you very much all for doing that work. So, it's clear that this region is a geostrategic hotspot. And I think I want to leave you with a couple of points increasing that are reflected in the report, and that I feel very deeply. In this era of great power competition, it is possible now for China and others who hold the water rights at the highest levels to continue to use those for leverage. And we have to be mindful of that now in this era, that it's not just about controlling the sea lanes, but it's controlling the water sources, inland water sources, and Asia's water tower. Now, that's not the only dynamic, but it is an important one. And therefore, this is an area about which we need to have global concern, and we need to be aware of how US leadership and engagement can make a difference. And I think there's some very notable, interesting recommendations in the report that I hope we'll get into a little bit. One I'm particularly taken with is a model of using an Arctic Council-like framework to bring multilateral cooperation on science and environment into this region, which is very significant when you think about what Mary just said about the increasing transparency available through technologies like remote sensing and others that will open the doors to what has in the past been some hidden areas by those who want to withhold their hydrological data. And that is going to be less and less possible in the future which could be a very positive forcing function in developing better governance systems. Because you have many long-standing water sharing arrangements in these transboundary regions among the major rivers of Asia. But there are many challenges today. One, as we've noted, there's increasing, with growing populations, increasing water scarcity and water stress, local governance issues. Most of these arrangements are also not climate smart in reflecting the changes to water availability and water variability in a world that is changing increasingly from climate threats. So we need to understand those dynamics and then use those partnership opportunities. And I want to also credit the U.S. Water Partnership here, Tom Harvey and the team that's been here, that's been working in a dedicated way now over many years to try to bring these many factors together, from the science to the technology, integrating both the opportunities in the private and public sector to be able to force sensible solutions attuned to current needs.
And remotely, let's go first to David.
Sure, thanks very much, and thank you all for joining us. And I'd also like to briefly thank all of the other people who have contributed to helping Peter and I with this report, the many people to whom we spoke and interviewed, not only for the report, but over the years, that have contributed so much to our knowledge of this subject. I think the panelists have already very well sketched out the importance of the subject, the importance of the intersection between changing ecology and evolving geopolitics, and the increasing recognition of that dynamism. So the only point that I would like to add to the conversation here is that despite the dynamism and the vibrancy of the region, but also the volatility and difficulty of the challenges that it faces, it singularly lacks cooperative institutions and architectures for tackling these challenges. And Sherry Goodman has just alluded to some of these questions, whether the existing arrangements are climate smart, whether they are adapted for tackling the growing water stress. And for the most part, they are not. In fact, despite the existence of agreements like the Indus Waters Treaty or the existence of bodies like the Mekong River Commission, there isn't a single river in the region that has a formal institutional cooperative agreement between all of the riparians, all of the countries sharing the river. So again, to circle back to the Indus example, the Indus Waters Treaty has existed since 1960 and has survived 2-3 wars, depending on how you count them, between India and Pakistan. Yet Afghanistan and China, who are also riparians on the Indus, are not parties to that treaty. So one of the singular challenges before us is to help adapt and revise and enhance those institutions, to expand them to include additional riparians, or to form and nurture them where they don't exist, so that we can better manage these challenges. And just as an example of how in some ways out of date some of these institutions and arrangements are, I'd just like to acknowledge and again emphasize Mary Melnick's point about increasing knowledge, exchange of data, and the Indus Waters Treaty, for example, does provide for the parties to share data. But it does so on first a monthly basis, and then suggests that data could also be shared on a daily basis, and then emphasizes that if either one of the parties thought that they needed the information more rapidly, then it could be sent by telegram or wireless to the other party, and the receiving party would pay for that information. So in this era of remote sensing and increasing knowledge on so many fronts, the institutional architecture that we have to benefit from that information is not up to date. And that's just illustrative of some of the problems that we face going forward.
Like an actual telegram or the app Telegram?
No. Should one party request supply of any of these data by telegram, telephone, or wireless, it shall reimburse the other party for the cost of transmission.
Okay, and an actual telegram.
End quote. End quote from the Indus Waters Treaty.
Cool. Well, not really, but yeah. Now to Flip. Is he there? Or did I just go to Flip?
Yes, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, all of you there in DC, and great pleasure to be beaming in from Kathmandu, the heart of the Himalayas. I've been living and working here for the past 6 years with the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development, an intergovernmental organization that brings together these 8 countries of the region, including China and India. And to my knowledge, the only institutional mechanism we have to date in which these 8 countries can come together and have discussions around what is happening. That's the role ICIMOD is playing. We are very happy to see this report and the attention, the increasing attention being given to the region, to the mountains, but also to what happens downstream. And yes, we're looking at a population of at least 2 billion people. So that would be a quarter of humanity directly depending on these 10 major rivers, these large river basins in this region. A few of them have already been named, the Indus, Ganga, and Brahmaputra, but also the Yellow and the Yangtze and the Amudarya, Sirdarya, and and I could go on, the Mekong, the Salween, the Irrawaddy. So, piece by piece, really significant rivers, and crucially important for people, for livelihoods, but also for religions and for ecosystems, and you name it. So a very, very big thanks to the Scowcroft Center, to the Atlantic Council, to Peter and David for putting this together. And I just want to, before we get into the panel discussion, reflect on some of the things that have already been said, but just to put this in a bit of a frame. So as part of ICIMOD's work over the last 3-4 years, we've done an assessment report, modeled loosely on the IPCC process. And part of that was doing scenarios work also. And we went to the countries and had, interactive scenario workshops and asking, what are the key threats? So having just people's inputs on that. And the 3 that came out as the key threats would be disasters, climate change, and poor governance. So mixing those 3, I think, is also what the report is doing. But in addition, this is still a region of extreme poverty. And, of the 250 million people in the mountains and hills of the Hindu Kush Himalaya, 80 million live in extreme poverty. So throwing that into the mix, shows you the kind of volatility we're dealing with. So it's not only a geostrategic hotspot, it's also a climate change hotspot. And our concern is we're not running out of water. Yes, the glaciers are melting, and yes, that should be stopped. And yes, we need very urgent climate action now to not go beyond the 1.5 degree agreed on in Paris. But our concern is very much also around the extremes, the spikes. So what you'll be seeing is much more erratic rainfall, leading to much more extreme rainfall events, leading to very scary scenarios in terms of flooding. And the institutional governance, infrastructural, human capacity, all of that is just not in place to be able to manage those risks. And so I think there's layering on top of the availability story and what's happening to the glaciers. Climate change is having a very significant impact on the monsoons, on rainfall, precipitation variability, and a significant increase in extreme rainfall events going forward. And, every single degree counts, every single tenth of a degree counts. So urgent climate action is called for. Thank you.
Thank you.
One more.
Sure.
So maybe one point that we haven't stressed much in this sort of opening round, and I know it's taken a while to get through the entire one question, but is to also, besides all of this dynamism, your question was about what is dynamic about this storyline, and we've all given different versions of that answer. with this clash between sort of the geopolitical, geostrategic question on the one hand, and sort of really supply side ecological changes on the other. By supply side, I mean essentially changes in hydrology. But there's also a very, very important demand side equation here too that we also stress in the document, which is that not everywhere, but in most places in Asia, you have owing to usually a combination of high economic growth and ongoing population growth, you do have enormous demand side pressures on these water sources at the very same time that the hydrology is changing and overlaid against the political challenges as well. And so you have these enormous trade-offs within the river systems themselves that you just get a ratcheting up of pressure on those systems coming from various kinds of human demand. And those trade-offs are often incompatible with one another. So because these rivers all start in high mountain ranges, by definition, that means they fall a long way, and therefore you have lots of opportunities to build dams. Building dams has all kinds of consequences, including, for example, on downstream fisheries, downstream irrigation systems. And so that's also another overlay in the storyline and making it even more complicated is that, and it's difficult to describe really the scale of that challenge going forward in the next few decades. Again, because of the number of humans involved, and the amount of pretty spectacular economic growth that is forecasted for many of these regions.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So the next round of discussion that I would like to move to is basically what the U.S. should be doing in this region. And maybe when this question gets to you, Mary, you can feel free to talk a little bit more about what we are doing, since working for USAID, you cannot exactly say all the things we should be doing but aren't doing in an on-the-record forum, although I would love it if you did. But I think the report bringing up the Arctic Council, how many people here know what the Arctic Council is? Okay, that's like the largest recognition of the Arctic Council I've seen, even at an Arctic Council meeting. So that's pretty great. I mean, the Arctic Council has had such success sort of because it is a cooperative institution that does not set binding rules, but that comes together, brings together all Arctic nations to manage the resources and try to address some of the geopolitical flashpoints. Whether it will continue to be successful as the sea ice continues to melt, that's another question. So one idea that was thrown out here is like an Arctic Council for the Himalayan region, and I could see that working, especially if you got buy-in from China, which is a big question. But in your minds, and feel free to engage each other on this or ask each other more pointed versions of this question if you like. But really, what should we be doing? Why should the Trump question would be, why should I care? Potentially, why should non-Asians care at all about this region? But really, it's what the U.S. should be doing in response to seeing these challenges in such a potentially destabilizing region that we would then need to get involved in pretty quickly. So whoever wants to start.
Well, Mary, if you don't mind, because you at USAID, along with the State Department, released last year the administration's global water strategy, right? Mm-hmm. And there are elements of that water strategy. You probably see some of that reflected in this report. But if you could share with us what more specifically you would like to see, what you're doing and what you would like to see elevated, let's say, in attention, how an Arctic Council concept would fit with the fact that you already have a lot of transboundary water sharing arrangements, or these track 1.52 dialogue concepts, which can be very useful in specific circumstances, but have to be finely tuned to the conditions.
Lots of questions. Thank you all. First of all, the report, I think, is extremely important at an important time because it's elevating this discussion. So the fact that you, Peter and David and the Atlantic Council have sponsored this report, I think is going to help us trigger and launch greater attention to the issue. There are those of us working in the government, myself at USAID and my State Department colleagues who couldn't be here today, such as Aaron Salzberg, who dedicate quite a lot of time to this, and Aaron is a co-author of the Global Water Strategy to some degree with USAID. So there are some of us who are looking at this issue, and I think with respect to the Global Water Strategy, we're very fortunate in its objectives. And with the information that this report and the constituency, because we are the government, we represent you, it's about what you as constituents would like us to be doing. At the same time, we're keeping an eye out for the American public, and we see that this is a looming crisis, as so eloquently pointed out in this report. So the Global Water Strategy has 4 key objectives. One primarily is the access to clean water and sanitation services for people in developing countries. Again, it's a global water strategy. Then there's also an emphasis on the management of natural resources and freshwater resources. The importance of governance over these resources, which I think is going to be a recurring theme throughout. And then finally, transboundary cooperation. The forward is there's a quote from President Trump about how important water is for the people. So I think at the very foundation, with the Global Water Strategy, support from Congress, support from institutions like your own, we have a wonderful foundation to actually launch into something that is a greater partnership. I would like to see this event as forming, and the Global Water Strategy, because that was quite an event itself. You're asking what I would have liked to have done, and I think it's possible. From the Global Water Strategy launch, we had anyone who's anyone, or whatever the phrase is, on water. And I think part of the approach to tackling this issue starts from the high-level diplomacy that the report has several recommendations, including an Arctic-type council, to the value of the private sector. And this speaks to a little bit to what Senator Whitehouse was saying about Americans being a bit of the light in the world. And we also have extraordinary universities, research institutions, and private sector. I mean, the U.S. environmental technology market is worth about $3 billion. So I think we're ripe for bringing our technologies in support of these countries to secure water resources. That supply angle with the increasing demand, there's a technology aspect to that. To increase water efficiencies. So what I would like to see is really all of us working together to engage more on this topic. We do have resources at hand. So we do have the Global Water Strategy. I cover the Asia Bureau, and obviously this is the part we're talking about. Aspects of some of the countries are also a part of the Indo-Pacific strategy that this administration is moving forward. And it speaks to concerns of governance, economic growth in the region, promoting prosperity, self-reliance, as well as security angles. And I think you very well pointed out there's the maritime issue and now the source of the waters. So within our office at USAID, and I'm the Environmental Security and Resilience Team Leader for the Asia Bureau, and we cover Afghanistan to the Pacific Islands, Mongolia down to the Maldives. We are identifying a role and a goal and objective for us within USAID to contribute to the Indo-Pacific strategy for natural resources management, of which is water security. So I try to look at things about what we can do as individuals and within our own capacities. And we, in the past, have worked on 2 aspects of the water security, the high mountain Asia problem. The one is the basic scientific research. We asked And we worked with the University of Colorado as well as 13 institutions in South and Central Asia, trying to understand really how much water is coming from glaciers specifically. And then we also took an approach of, we need to take immediate action, and so what can we do? And we focused on watershed management, actually using the snow leopard as the iconic species. There's not perfect overlap of snow leopards in headwater areas, but it's pretty close. And so working with, you know, there's one, water management, which involves local communities and people. They not only are the ones living up there and protecting the watershed to some degree, but they're also going to be the first impacted of glacier retreat. So we tried to look at this as a holistic manner and work together. So getting to the questions, I think I'm kind of getting there with what we're doing, and Sherry's question about where we would like to go. One of the successes we had with the snow leopard conservation angle is we got the, well, it's everyone working together. That's the key. Remember, if we can all work together. The 12 snow leopard range countries, including China, have identified 23 conservation landscapes. So I think fundamental to this discussion and trying to avoid conflict is helping to protect the watersheds. And these 23 landscapes have been designated on paper. So what I would like to see next is continuing partnership with these countries. These are the governments themselves that have designated these conservation areas. And they're vast. In fact, they pretty much cover, if you take the ring of the Himalayas, I'll have to send a graphic to folks, but the World Wildlife Fund did this work, and there are reports on that. But they pretty much ring the Tibetan Plateau. And so that's one of the aspects I think we may be looking forward to moving forward on, is continuing to bring those stakeholders together in a positive dialogue on the conservation angle of the headwater areas. But similarly, this is nascent, this is just the discussion vision, you know, bringing together the private sector and American businesses and all of different types of American assets, including the thinking here at the Atlantic Council to help address this issue. And I think we do have some resources, so it's not fully pipe dreams. So yes, let's keep in touch, and I welcome hearing from everyone. Thank you, Sherry, as well. I'd be interested in hearing from ICIMOD too about what their views of positive engagement with China on this issue.
Yeah,
Because they work, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Mary, am I coming through okay?
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh. Great. Yeah, thank you for the question on ICIMOD and the positioning of China. I just wanted to go back just a little bit. You were mentioning about these landscapes. So one of the programs we have to bring countries together is actually, ICIMOD has a program on transboundary landscapes. And this includes the Kailash sacred landscape, in which China, India, and Nepal, the three governments, are being convened by ICIMOD. And over the past 7 years have made quite significant steps towards protecting and conserving that landscape. So there are, I think, examples of positive examples of countries that you would not immediately expect to be, you know, working together and coming together, but through the platform ICIMOD provides are getting over their cold feet and starting to see the importance of this. I think if you look at the 8 countries, you know, from Afghanistan through to Myanmar, and then China, India, and Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, our sense at ICIMOD is we are an intergovernmental organization. The 8 countries own us. They sit on our board of governors. They decide our work plan and budgets. They also put money into the organization. But our role is a knowledge center, right? So we're intergovernmental, but very much around knowledge sharing, knowledge generation, and science cooperation between the countries. And I think that's working very well. And we, you know, on a weekly basis have events here with people from all the countries coming together. I think what we're looking at now, and I think this report by the Atlantic Council also feeds into that, is we would also now like to see more of a policy and a political process or track, if you like, in which we start building that institutional infrastructure in which these 8 countries come together around the mountains, around the environments in these mountains, around the 250 million people living up here, around their livelihoods, and around climate change. And I think it's been mentioned a few times, the Arctic Council. We've been exploring that model over the past 4 years and interacting with the Arctic Council to learn from them. I think it's up to our 8 member countries to indicate their appetite and to see if this is if this could be a mechanism that could work for them. Note that both China and India are observers of the Arctic Council, so they know the mechanism, they know how it works in the Arctic. So I think that's very positive because that gives us something to point to and saying, you're an observer up north in the Arctic. Is this a model we could learn from for the third pole? I think time will tell if China would be willing to engage. I think it's just very difficult to be able to say something on that. But it's not only China, it's also India. So I think we need to be looking at both of those countries. On the other hand, I think the appeal, the aesthetic, the spiritual, the overall appeal of these mountains, the importance of these mountains in their histories of these countries. So they do serve as a rallying call. And I think around issues of climate change and environment, I'm optimistic that these countries could come together to move forward. But it will take time, and it's very much something that needs to be led by the countries themselves. And they clearly have to indicate an appetite to want to explore this. And we see ICIMOD's role as convening and providing a safe space to have those type of discussions, and then to see what, where to take it.
One more question that I think stems from something that Flip just said, which is about China and India and having to see where they go and whether they have the appetite for this. What is the fear, maybe Sherry or Flip or whoever else on the panel wants to address it, but what is the fear that you have about an increasingly assertive China in that region having increased control of or influence over water resources for downstream countries at a time when the United States is arguably pulling back around the world? Not that we aren't engaged in this particular region, but I just wonder whether there is some sort of concern over China's evolving role, or if that's something that, just isn't there and the reality is different.
Well, I'll take a shot at that. This is another straightforward, easy to answer question, can be done in 30 seconds. So yes, there is great concern about China in Asia and here in the United States and elsewhere for the reasons that you mentioned, right? So for two major reasons. One is that China is the upstream riparian. It is, with the exception of, I believe, Russia, North Korea, and Mongolia, China is upstream of everyone else, literally, meaning its rivers flow into their countries. So that gives its enormous sort of hydrological power in a hydrodiplomatic context. And second, as we all know, China is, this booming power and increasingly assertive in every way, including geopolitically on the Asian landmass. And so, yes, there's a good deal of concern about, well, will China then leverage this position, this combination of sort of standard dimensions of national power married to its hydrological position to essentially assert some kind of hydrologically based power over its neighbors, and that animates a lot of fear in, for example, India, right? in particular over the Brahmaputra. But I think there's at least two ways to read this, a positive and a negative. The negative, of course, is just that, right, which is that to read everything, to read China as acting in geostrategic terms when it comes to hydrological questions all the time, which personally I think is a mistake to do. And second, the more positive one is that the more it embeds itself in the affairs of its neighbors through the Belt and Road Initiative, through playing sort of a chess match with India for influence in South Asia and with the Americans and other countries in Southeast Asia, the more it has to play a role that is also constructive, and that includes being aware of the dependence on this water that these countries have, right? So I think you can read both of those at the same time. So one of the questions that I have in my mind is, it looks like the United States and China are becoming increasingly antagonistic. I mean, sort of the headline towards one another, defining each other maybe as rivals, whereas maybe in the past the United States was more optimistic than it is now, that China could be absorbed into sort of the international order as it rises, and that's a bit more of a question now. So if in the future the United States and China become more rivals, it's going to be important for us to find ways in which we can cooperate with them. And I think water is a space in which that can be a space in which that can be done. For a whole host of reasons, many of which we lay out in this report. And I think that's because the nature of transboundary water is itself amenable to finding cooperative solutions, because everyone is dependent upon these resources. And I think that the U.S., if it plays to its strengths, including all of the reasons that the Senator mentioned, other reasons here today, that we can play a very positive role in doing that, and we can be constructive in engaging China.
David, did you wanna jump in on that?
On the China question?
Yeah.
Well, only to agree that it's a two-sided coin, a double-edged sword, and much will depend on the evolution of the socioeconomic stresses, the demand pressures that Peter mentioned, as well as the ability of the region collectively to identify mutually beneficial opportunities and solutions, and this is where the role of increasing the availability, the accuracy of data and understanding is so important, because as Peter and other panelists have suggested, in the transboundary space where the resources is shared and so many are dependent upon the viability of ecosystems, the reliability of the water supply for their livelihoods, there's space for a mutual recognition of that interdependence, even in the upstream-downstream dimension, where the downstream countries provide not only markets for the products, the economies of the upstream countries, but vice versa. So water is a network that can tie the region together, but because of the complexity of the challenges, and also because of the vital nature, the existential nature of the resource, there is a risk that countries will adhere to their perceived security needs over the possibilities for cooperation, and that they will come potentially to see water as a source of competition, or at least a need to ensure their own resources. And it's through the initiatives to develop and share knowledge that the parties can identify opportunities for mutual benefit and for mutual advantage, because as Flip mentioned at the outset, despite the pressures on the water resources, there is enough water to meet the demands of the region if managed effectively. And it's through knowledge and understanding that we can manage those resources more effectively for the common benefit of all of the countries of the region.
Great, thank you.
May I just add something? I would just like to add a little bit about the governance issues that have been raised in the report as well. And we've also been talking, people talk among themselves about, China has so many resources, financial resources, for which they're gaining access to these countries and the country's natural resources. I think we're at a transition period here in which some of the countries are seeing that the terms of these agreements are not as good as they may appear. They're increasing fees associated with whatever financial loan, and then people will be seeing the environmental impacts of the infrastructure projects, and I'll pivot specifically to infrastructure as well. So I say it's a transition because people are, I think, beginning to see in these countries what they're receiving, and the constant challenge is the corruption at high levels for those making these deals. But at the same time, there's the transition of civil society seeing what's happening and hopefully having a voice. And USAID's goals is promoting democracy and governance and rule of law and civil society strengthening. As well, an angle that perhaps you wouldn't think immediately is, as one of our objectives in addressing the water security issue, is promoting environmental and social safeguards. There are international standards of how you do infrastructure to mitigate environmental impacts. There are rules and laws associated with these standards. And most governments have some form of environmental impact legislation. So how do we begin to promote these standards along with good infrastructure that the US can offer about how to do things? Hydro in the report, a huge issue. Another transition, at one point there are different ways of doing hydroelectric power, there are different renewables coming on board, there are different systems. So this is a transition period, and let's look at all the opportunities moving forward to address the problems that include environmental and social safeguards.
Great. Sherry, did you want anything?
I just close on that by saying I think there are important ways that the U.S. can counter China's growing influence on water issues in this region, and that is one, by staying engaged through both USAID, other U.S. agencies that are providing research, support, engagement, and the diplomatic engagement. Second is by the provision of technology and opportunities through the private sector. And third is by strengthening multilateral institutions.
I'd like to turn it over to questions from the audience. If you want to just, I think there's going to be a roving microphone. If you want to just identify yourself and affiliation and try to limit it to a question rather than more of a statement, that would be great. So I'll leave it to the folks. Yes.
Right there?
Yep, right there in the front.
I can yell. I'm Harlan Ullman with the Atlantic Council. Thank you. I'd really like you to focus on what really can be done, because you're talking more about issues on the margin. It seems to me politically you face a Scylla on one hand, which is a combination of Donald Trump and the new Green Deal, and Charybdis on the other, which basically is, we really don't like, upon the riparian states, your intervention. As Donald Trump has rejected the unanimous conclusion of the national intelligence community that the Russians interfered, what he would say to your briefing is, it's a hoax, we don't have anything that we need to do here. And the new Green Deal has proposed a program which ranges more towards fantasy than reality. And there are a lot of countries who really don't want our involvement because, especially in the case of China, it's none of our business. So how do you negotiate these problems when something really needs to be done, but politically, maybe laissez-faire is our best approach?
Well, Harlan, what I'd say to that is that, given the great power competition in which this administration has framed its national security strategy, it's very apparent in this region, okay, and by China. And so we should integrate water and climate security elements into our national security strategy, which is one of the recommendations of the report. It actually tracks quite closely with recommendations from the CNA Military Advisory Board, Admiral Gunn sitting next to you, about integrating climate, water, and energy security factors into our national security strategies at all levels. So I think that's important. And I think, you know, having testified before the House Foreign Affairs Committee earlier this week, where there was unanimous bipartisan support on recognition of climate as a security threat, and a lot of discussion in that committee about global challenges from Africa to Asia, a lot of discussion about China in the Arctic. I think there is recognition that the U.S. needs to continue to engage in meaningful ways. Now, are we going to be always the leader? It's clear if you're going to take an Arctic Council framework and apply it in the Himalayas, the U.S. might end up as an observer as opposed to a seat at the table, because it's not a Himalayan country. But that doesn't, in my view, negate the importance of American engagement, and particularly of stepping up the role for the private sector in this area, because there are examples going back 20 years, some of which I know you're familiar with, Harlan, where we've had U.S. defense companies providing remote sensing for conservation of forested areas, tropical rainforest areas. So we're talking about sort of the next generation of technologies that can help advance that, and the U.S. should maintain its innovation and technological leadership in that area.
The White House is opposed to that.
I don't.
Which is a problem.
From my perspective in covering the White House, I don't think the White House is opposed to an innovation agenda, number one, because that's part of what's coming out of OSTP increasingly, especially on certain technologies like AI, quantum computing, new funding for supercomputers, and even climate research quietly is still skating by. And the through-line narrative of an emerging great power struggle between the United States and China is powerful enough that I could see, this type of framework and increased U.S. engagement in that region as being justified by that alone. China's increasingly assertive in this area. This area is crucial for our relationships with other countries. We don't want to have to get involved in an armed conflict in this region over water. So maybe we should be engaging more. But no, I don't know whether President Trump, has thought about the third pole. I would bet no. But people in the administration, I think, have.
Could I just weigh in real quickly? I agree with everything.
Andrew, could I just very briefly jump in here with an opportunity for American opportunity as well as American engagement?
Yeah, go for it, and then we'll give Peter a chance to say. Go ahead.
Sure. Sorry, just very briefly, I could see from the transmission delay that I was stepping a little bit on Peter's toes, but just to turn the telescope around just for a second and talk about American opportunity. That the American bank robber, Willie Sutton, when he was asked why does he rob banks, his answer was, that's where the money is. And in Himalayan Asia, that's where the opportunities for a lot of economic development and innovation reside. According to the McKinsey Global Institute, worldwide, there is a need for $500 billion every year of investment in the water sector from now until 2035. China will need $34 trillion of investment. India, $8 trillion. The rest of developing Asia, $6 trillion. Those are huge opportunities for American firms, American technology to participate. So it's not only a question of heading off potential security risks, but also of meeting development opportunities.
Peter?
David reinforced a point I wanted to make, but the other one was that the United States. Two points. One is that I think that water is has much greater potential to remain a bipartisan and even nonpartisan issue as opposed to climate, because water, it's tangible, and we all know why it matters, right? And you can measure it easily and so forth, and you can see floods and droughts and so forth. So that's point one. So that's why I think having a robust conversations around water, which is of course a pathway through which climate works, right, is valuable in my opinion. But the other reason why the United States should care is because the countries in the region care about water, and this issue is not going anywhere. In fact, it's going to get more important over time. And if we care at all about China and India and Pakistan and all of the other countries in Asia as a country, and our positioning vis-a-vis all of those countries, then by almost on a definitional level, this issue matters now and will matter more in the future.
We'll go to the next question. I see a hand raised over there.
Hi, Kyle Gardner, McClarty Associates. One of the terms that I've heard everyone use in one form or another is transboundary. But it seems to me that one of the real fundamental sticking points here is precisely the issue of boundaries and disputed boundaries. Between the Aksai Chin, the size of Switzerland, Arunachal Pradesh, which is even larger, and of course Kashmir, it seems that any sort of transboundary cooperation is really stuck with the issue of defining international boundaries. So I'd be curious to hear any thoughts you all had on that.
Sure. Do you want to take that from a security perspective, or do you think somebody else might be best?
Well, I would just say, water knows no boundaries. That's why it's transboundary. The water runs between those boundaries. Yes, you have the land boundaries, and you also have climate changing boundaries. It's most dramatically seen in the small Pacific island states, but it's also having impact in inland areas where river levels are changing. So, we have to be able to do both. You have to recognize that the legal state boundaries exist on a land basis, but the water, an increasingly scarce resource and vital resource in the region, is going to continue to flow.
Next question. I see like two hands there. So one right there.
Thank you very much. My name is Satoru Nagao, the Japanese in the Hudson Institute. My question is, there is a discussion, if India stops the flow of water to Pakistan, China will stop water to India as an ally of Pakistan. So is it really possible? And simply said, can we stop the flow of water? If possible, how many dams does China need? Is my question.
I'm sorry, the question is, how many dams does China need in order to stop the flow of the water on the Brahmaputra?
Yeah, Kathmandu here would be happy to take that question.
All right, over to Flip.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think first, if and David can comment a bit more on that. But the Indus River, because of the Indus Waters Treaty, which was, by the way, brokered due to U.S. engagement and support. It's important to highlight that, and still much appreciated in the region, that support in the 1950s with David Lilienthal and the World Bank. The rivers have actually been re-engineered, so India cannot cut off the flow to Pakistan. That is the whole purpose of the Indus Water Treaty. So actually three of the tributaries go to India, and three of the other tributaries go to Pakistan. So that's kind of geo-nonsense talk, right? That is in the media, but if you actually look at the infrastructure in place, there is only very limited situations where India can, I mean, there's on some of the rivers, they can control the flow somewhat going into Pakistan. And that will always come up at election time, and there will always be discussion, oh, the Indus Water Treaty, we're going to blow it up, etc. But it's not going to happen. China, in no way whatsoever, can influence the flow of the Brahmaputra into India. That, again, is just some nonsense fake news stuff out there. 90% of the Brahmaputra river flow is precipitation, monsoon-driven, which falls in India itself. So the contribution coming out of the Tibetan Plateau is only 10%. And yes, that 10% is important during the dry season, the Feb, March, April period. But to my knowledge, there's talk on one or two main stem dams in the Jarlung Thingpo in Tibetan Plateau. To my knowledge, those dams have not been built, and maybe there's one that has been built. But again, China would never do that, and India would never do that, cutting off flows, because that is an act of war. And if it will be perceived as an act of war by the other country. And then we have the conflagration we'd be very, very concerned about. David, do you want to add to that, or would you agree with my assessment, or?
I would both agree, but also add simply the technical point that it's not possible to indefinitely withhold the river flow, that dams are built to precise specifications and operate on what are called the operational or management curves that determine how much water can be held in a reservoir versus how much needs to be released before too much pressure builds up on the dam and you have catastrophic failure. So for a country like India, which to begin with, as Flip mentioned, doesn't actually currently possess enough infrastructure on its upstream tributaries of the Indus to permanently withhold the water flow. But holding water back behind a dam means ultimately flooding your own territory and also running the risk of catastrophic dam failure. And the last point is that the dams, even the infrastructure that exists in India, or the dams that might be built within China, would actually be a significant distance upstream from the borders. So even if an upstream riparian were withholding water from a downstream rival, it would also be withholding water from its own downstream citizens. And again, in the event of a catastrophic dam failure, risking flooding its own citizens downstream. And I would circle back just finally to the question about the subnational boundaries and the contested territories of Arunachal Pradesh, Kashmir, Tibet itself. Were the central government in India using dams in Kashmir to withhold water from flowing downstream into Pakistan, it would also be cutting off water flows downstream to its own citizens in Kashmir with all the attendant consequences.
Could I just add one wrinkle to this? So we have both Flip and David saying, this is not only not technically feasible to do this, or if it can be done, it's to do it for very long. And it's also really unwise for the upstream riparian to do this, right? Despite that, in both cases, India, China, and Pakistan, India, you still have this popular discourse, which is often leveraged by politicians in all of in at least two of those countries, about around fears of exactly this kind of thing happening. So there's this gap between sort of technical questions and geopolitical questions and popular conversation around it. And what that speaks to is essentially fear, right, and historic grievances and suspicions about the motives of the population or of the country on the other side of some border. Not always, by the way, an international border, sometimes subnational borders as well. And so this is a contributory factor to the problem in Asia, is this lack of sort of transboundary trust, if you will. It's not just a question of transboundary water, it's very much a question of transboundary relationships. And so de-securitizing those conversations can lead to much more productive outcomes.
Great. I think we have time for one last question.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm Dave Herman from the water team in the Ocean Environment Science Bureau at State Department. Great panel. Thank you very much, and thank you for the report authors. A couple things I'd like to emphasize and then try to turn that into a question, which unfortunately will reveal that I have not yet read your report, a situation I will rectify when I get back to the office today. But one is that, looking at, we always try to look at things, well, I shouldn't say we always try to look at it, but the sort of glass half full perspective of looking at these sorts of issues is that water can be a potential source of conflict, obviously, but very much is a source of cooperation, and that's something we always like to emphasize, and I think a couple of panelists have alluded to that. I would also like to respond to the idea that was raised in another question that a lot of these countries don't want the United States involved. We're frankly not seeing that. I mean, they certainly don't want us going in a bull in a china shop approach and, very loudly announcing our presence and trying to dictate terms and that sorts of things. But in terms of treading lightly and quiet diplomacy, I think the U.S. is always welcome in that region working on some of these problems. So my question that's going to reveal I haven't read the report is, first of all, thank you for Mary and Sherry and, talking about the potential for offering U.S. technology and U.S. water infrastructure as solutions to some of these problems, and that's something we very much like to promote. I think another area where the U.S. has tremendous expertise is our history of and our understanding of handling transboundary water disputes with our neighbors, with Canada and with Mexico. And also internally, we've got all these, Mississippi River, Colorado River. Well, maybe that's not such a great example now, but anyway, we've got tremendous history of having these commissions that we've set up have done an amazing job. And if you look at the International Joint Commission, our great relations with Canada should not be taken for granted. And one of the keys to the success is the International Joint Commission that manages the boundary waters. So I guess my turning this into a question and just asking the authors to respond to how they feel our example of these boundary water commissions and our example of managing our rivers can best be used to help the countries in those regions. Thank you.
Well, without a time lag, I will defer to David. I know we're running over, so this has to be very, very quick. But yes, I think this is an example of the exact kind of leadership that the Senator Whitehouse said at the very opening, which is that one of the greatest strengths that we have is actually it's not monetary, it's not expressed through sort of material power, but it's really our leadership, and it's our ability to basically to be to not only set an example, but to also lead through it, right? And one of the reasons why we wanted to put in a subsection on creating an Arctic Council except for the Himalayas was that we think that the United States, despite the fact that it's not a riparian anywhere, we're obviously not an Asian power, we are positioned, we have the material resources to be able to lead this kind of a thing, but we also have that sort of standing in the world to be able to lead that kind of an effort, and we detail how that could occur going forward. So my answer is a resounding yes. One of the ways in which the United States should engage, should do more and better of, is precisely as you articulate.
Yeah. The U.S. can certainly lead by example, and we've got the experience, the history, the past performance, credentials and qualifications, and we have a broad range of hydro-diplomats, if you will, both in government like yourself and those out of government. There are many, even retired military leaders and others, private sector leaders who are very experienced in this area, who can and are very committed to advancing cooperation and bringing together the range of tools and people needed to make real concrete progress. Thank you.
I think I'm going to end it there. I give a round of applause for the panelists. And for those who joined internationally and led and lent their perspective, it's greatly appreciated and really vital information. And thank you for having me here. So we have closing remarks now. I didn't realize that I was supposed to introduce you. Oh my God. So I'm just going to have you come up and let's see here. This is Carrie Lee, co-founder Pine Street Alternative Asset Management, and a senior advisor at the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security here at the Atlantic Council for some closing remarks. And I look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Andrew, for the very improvisation introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Carrie Lee. I am the founder of Pine Street Alternative Asset Management, former president of a Himalayan NGO called Live to Love, and current senior advisor to the Atlantic Council. I wanted to thank all the speakers today for sharing their thoughts on a very critical topic. The conversation was dynamic, informative, and very much needed. I wanted to also thank Fred at the Atlantic Council, Barry at the Scowcroft Center for your leadership and support, U.S. Water Partnership for co-hosting, and Peter and David for the dedication in the last 2 years for bringing this report into fruition. All of you guys here today in this room and on the internet, thank you for your time and attention. I've been working in the Himalayas for the past 15 years. I've lived with villagers and nomadic tribes in northern India, Nepal, Bhutan, and China. I've learned that the Himalayas traverses through many countries and cradles countless of civilizations, cultures, ethnicities, traditions, and the one thing that they all have in common is a drive to survive in a rapidly modernizing world. While these communities work tirelessly every day to protect their land and resources, what they desperately need is a cohesive policy and transboundary cooperation. So nobody is happier than I am today to see this report released. I particularly appreciate that the report highlights the importance of the Himalayas and how its ecological impact is unrivaled anywhere else in the world. It is no wonder they call the Himalayas the third pole and its glaciers the water towers of Asia. This means, of course, how well or poorly we manage the Himalayan resources will have profound, lasting impacts for the future of Asia and for the United States' interests. I think this document does an excellent job explaining the challenges, articulating what's at stake, and offering real solutions. So, to state the obvious, please spend some time with this report, study it, and share it with everybody you know. Please feel free to tweet about it, #ACWater. I like to stress that at the heart of this report isn't just the governments and the nations and its governments, but the people and the communities that live along the riverbanks and who depend on these resources. For them, water security is a matter of daily survival. Their governments are worried about water security because they have this deep fear that they cannot secure enough water for its citizens, which is why this issue bleeds into geopolitics. Going forward, it's going to be abundantly clear that we need smart people in government, in the scientific community, in the private sector, in the philanthropic world, and civil society to work together to come up with creative, lasting solutions. If not, water insecurity is going to be an ever-growing problem in Asia and for us here in the United States. To that end, here in the US, we need to develop more pathways on engagement, not just on this topic, but understanding the region further. The United States has a really important role to play, and there is still time. So once again, thank you so much for being here, and please share this report with everybody. Thank you.